Jamel had a vision. He was ahead of a lot of people, and nobody ever knew what his vision was. He was capturing life in its purest form. Do you agree with those statements? And if so, what is life in its purest form to you?
Well, at that time, life in its purest form really was a time before crack. A time when there was still hope. That's what I was looking for, the hope. Despite all the senseless deaths that were going on in the community, I was optimistic for a moment, and Tony, that young brother who shared that was a brother who I spent a lot of time with, back in the day. He was one I was trying to save heavily.
You leave work and you got to leave work. Everyone has to decompress when they leave work. You kind of leave that energy in the past. Um, and it's probably it's very unique for you because the kind of job that you had. So, what does a Jamel Shabazz day look like when you're having this other job of being a photographer on the street? Like, what does that day look like from the beginning to the end?
Well, it's waking up and giving gratitude first, and looking to better understand my mission for that day. What is going to be my objective today? What am I going to try to, who am I going to try to reach? I always try to maintain, my physical state. So I work out, I used to do a lot of running and training to keep myself physically fit to be able to encounter all the obstacles that was in my path. So I always worked out, and I was just always building. I was just looking to connect and build with people. When I wasn't physically in the street, I'm in my residence, I'm getting into my music to decompress. So music was very instrumental. Relationships are very important, to have conversations with conscious-minded individuals that we shared similar thoughts with was very vital to me. We have the saying, still sharp and still, men sharpen men. I needed to reboot myself by having conversations and being amongst people that we had similar concerns. But the music was very instrumental in helping me heal. And like I said, meditation and working out. I spend a lot of time in the ocean. I found that by going there, really gave me the balance I need to continue to go deal with the hardships of the concrete. So spent a
Yeah.
lot of time in the ocean, spent a lot of time in the park where I would just get lost and go into deep woods to meditate and get closer to nature. And I think a lot of that came from my time in the military because I spent a lot of time in the field. So I kind of like missed that because it gave me an opportunity to do a lot of thinking. So when I wasn't at work, I was working out in Prospect Park, training and going deep in the woods to get my balance because you needed that because once you step back into that arena, that gladiator school, you're dealing with violence. And in most cases, you're working 16 hours a day in certain days. When I first started, 16 hours a day in a very negative atmosphere. So when you're experiencing that, you don't really have a time to even do a lot of workout. All you want to do is you reboot yourself and decompress and heal to go deal with another day because you're seeing certain things that are traumatizing you. You're dealing with certain levels of PTSD when you see a young kid get sliced up for no reason. You know what I mean? When you find out that these brothers that you were mentoring for a number of months raped the kid in the shower, how do you process that? You know what I mean? How do you process sitting down on a brother's bed to let him know that his father, who he's been telling you about for numerous months, just died? And then after you told him that his father died, he takes a razor and goes to an innocent kid and plays tic-tac-toe in his face because that's how he got out his frustration. How do you try to convince a young kid not to hang himself only to find out that his mother's boyfriend raped him and now he got AIDS? So when you go through all of that trauma, you got to try to decompress from it. And thankfully, we had 2 vacations a year that allowed us to travel to kind of like heal because, again, you're dealing with trauma.
Yeah.
And you're trying to break down this violence that you're seeing every day. It's baffling to you, the brutality every day. Not a day went by where you didn't see some form of brutality.
Yeah. So when you're out walking the streets with your camera, was every picture intentional?
I travel with intent. One of the things that my father taught me early on was to have themes. So that was embedded within my mind that there were certain themes that was already in my head, such as fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, joy, friendship, twins. So I had that in my mind. But my main focus throughout much of the 1980s and 90s with youth culture, young people. And where I lived at, the stretch of the avenue, Church Avenue, from the 90s to Flatbush Avenue on to Red Hook in downtown Brooklyn, the young people everywhere. They were on the corner. The Ave was always live with the young people. And as I traveled, I would connect with all these different pockets of young people just building, getting to know them, to shake their hand, to embrace them, to make sure they was all right. Occasionally, I'll have some of them roll with me and teach them photography, teach them chess. So y'all ain't doing nothing right now. Let's go hang. Matter of fact, I'm going to the barbershop. You want to get a haircut? So as I would travel up and down the avenue, I looked to get students so I can teach. I didn't have a whole lot, but the little bit that I had that I knew, I wanted to impart to them. So I taught a lot of young brothers photography. I might go with my camera and take a picture with them and say, yo, here, take my camera. Let me show you how this works. Take a picture of me. I would teach brothers the importance of understanding the science of chess, the physical game. One of the greatest gifts that I got during my time in the military, because I said this game is symbolic to life. You have to understand that we are dealing with war, and you got to understand strategy. You have to have an objective. You got to understand sacrifice. You have to have vision. If you play this game and then you are attaching onto your strategy in life, you're going to be successful, because in life you're going to have obstacles. You're going to have opposition. You have to make some hardcore decisions. They're going to be both positive and negative. So I used to always carry a chessboard with me and teach a lot of the brothers chess. And as time would progress, I started to spend a lot of time with a lot of young sisters too, the different high schools. I would go up to Erasmus, and there was a lot of sisters that I took on as my younger sisters. And these are just young girls that might have been a few years younger than me. And I would build them about the importance of relationships and goals and objectives and being careful out there. So I adopted them as my young sisters. Yeah. I would take them to the park and I would build with them. We would get mangoes and orange juice and just build about life. And I would speak to them the importance of reading Essence magazine and just maintaining your womanhood and seek a man who's going to guide and protect you. So, when you look at a lot of my work, you see some of these young sisters that just weren't random women. These are women that I built relationships over time. And in the beginning, I didn't know them, but I would go to 3 major locations on any given day. One was the local high school in my neighborhood, Tilden. They had an abundance of young people. So I go there in the morning and hang out with a lot of young people and build with the young brothers about goals and objectives. And then later on in the afternoon, I would go to Erasmus High School. And when they got out of school at 2 o'clock, I would be on Flatbush Avenue kicking it with a lot of them. I'd have me a little spot right on the avenue, and they would come. And it's like I was in a sense, I was doing street ministry. Yeah. And I started to build with them and develop a relationship. And I never wanted anything in return other than to survive and make it. And then I would go downtown Brooklyn, which was that major conduit where a lot of the high schools were merged after school. And I would start to build with a lot of the brothers there. And they came from different parts of Brooklyn, from Coney Island, Marcy Projects, Fort Greene, Gowanus. And that helped me to build an even better, a wider cipher. And my message was always pretty much the same thing. And so I always went with intention. Certain things would be spontaneous, but my focus was always young people. I got to go after the young.
Yeah. I noticed a common theme in your work is friendship. You've taken so many photos of kids, high school kids, young Black and Hispanic men and women in groups, and they were posing palm to palm or back to back in the middle of the, middle, dapping each other. And, that goes back to you seeing the importance of brotherly love when you were in the Army, and then you felt like that was going away when you came back home. So is that the reason why you tell people to, because I saw in the documentary, you're like kind of telling people like, dap each other up and like show each other love when they're posing. So is that one of the reasons why you do that?
It's a combination. I think that when I first started, and even now, when you approach a person who agrees to allow you to photograph them, they might say, well, what do you want me to do? So they didn't know what to do. So now I had the posing became a part of my creative process. So I said, okay, and then I had to theme the handshakes. So that was always something. I wanted to show that brotherly love. Yeah. So that's why you see a lot of the brothers showing, giving a handshake. Or I might even say, show some love. So you might see the embrace, something you're not going to really see too much today. Yeah. I'll back them up against a wall. You know what I mean? And I might crouch people down. I got that from my father because that's what he did in the Navy. You don't want the tall person blocking the short person. So now you're visualizing this image now. You have to create it now. So you tell people to crouch now, and I call it putting the flavor in it. The flavor is that extra, that additional oomph that enhances the image. And then as time would progress, it would become the battle of the poses, especially downtown Brooklyn, where I didn't realize it was that deep down there, especially in front of the Albee Square Mall, where you have a lot of young people and some of them are enemies of each other. And I might be taking a picture of one posse and there might be another posse across the street observing me, and I'm observing maybe their enemy. And then they see me posting, posing them. And then after I get that picture, I might roll up on them and say, yo, I know y'all can do a better pose than that. You know what I mean? They say, we can't. And the next day they give me a fire pose because they knew that the work was going to be seen. So the posing it made it fun. And at the same time, it helped give direction.
Yeah.
And my work varies because if I look at my negatives, you'll see some images of pose and some of them unposed. The posing part was about making it fun because you didn't just want a boring picture. You wanted people to interact with each other and they leave you feeling good now. They realize that you helped to create through this collaboration, this powerful picture that's now iconic, where if it wasn't set up like that, it would just be a regular picture. I want to create something that really represented the people which I was photographing. So adding that pose with that flavor to it really allowed me to enhance and give greater depth to the photograph and at the same time show flavor and love.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what is the significance of showing that pure form of companionship?
For me, it's important because, again, I'm going back to the jail now, and I'm bringing these images into the jail to show young people what love looks like. Because in jail, you're doing a lot of hate. And not to say that you don't have those poses in jail, because in many cases, some people look at them as jail. They call them jailhouse poses. So that's really interesting, too. But I wanted people to see what freedom and love looks like, for those brothers that was incarcerated. They were dealing with a very violent atmosphere every day. So by me coming in with photographs of brotherhood, love, and handshakes, it stimulated them. You know what I mean? It provoked thought amongst them. Because I want to show the other side too. Because like I said, when I'm going to jail, I'm looking at the violence. You know what I mean? I'm looking at dudes that don't trust each other. You know what I mean? A lot of anger, a lot of hatred. So I needed to go out there and capture images like that, because it was good for me too. To look at, it gave me a sense of hope. And it gave me the balance from all the negativity I was seeing every day. I needed to see that for me. I needed to know that it still existed.
Yeah. In Jamel Shabazz, street photographer, you spoke about how a lot of guys would probably be apprehensive towards having their picture taken because of criminality they were involved in. But you built a rapport, like you spoke about, with these guys that's making them feel comfortable. So what is it about your personality and character that gave you the ability to disarm and make said guys comfortable?
I think that what it is it's my sincerity. I'm coming to you with sincere intentions. We have a saying that we grew up with back in the days. I want for my brothers, I want for myself. So when I went into those different circles and I saw these young men, I wanted the best for them because so many of them were dying. And when they knew that I came as a righteous man. I just didn't come as a photographer, as an exploiter.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be seen in that light. I wanted to be seen as a big brother. You know what I mean? I wanted to be seen as a guy, as a good brother. You know what I mean? One of the greatest compliments a person could say to me is that he's a good brother. I want to be a good brother. So when I rolled up on them, I embraced everybody. I shook everybody's hand, gave everybody love. I wanted everyone to know that I recognized their greatness, to the best of my ability. So I came as someone who was just and true and didn't want anything in return because what's unique about my process, with the 1 hour photos, I would jet to Chinatown, get the pictures printed. I would go back downtown Brooklyn, or I would see them the next day and give them the photographs, and I didn't want anything. So through that process, I was able to build friendships with a lot of those young brothers that I still have to this very day because nobody was doing it. Back then, it was all about a hustle, and individuals made the assumption that, this person is just trying, he wants some money from us. I didn't want any money. I wanted your time. I looked at it as an opportunity that this compass, this camera, led me to you for whatever reason. I don't know why we met on this path of life, brother, but I met you here. I'm going to freeze this moment in time, and it might mean something later on in life. Sure enough, 40 years later, all of it is relevant, brother. All of it. Because those photographs I took 40 years ago, when I share them on my social media feed, it means so much to so many people. You follow me, so you see the impact that the images have when I could post a photograph of a brother who just died. Yeah. And now people are saying, wow, look at him.
Yeah.
Even for the brother who I just recently posted, my man Sam, who died over the weekend, what's interesting about it, he didn't have a lot of pictures of himself. So that photograph he was able to use when he was alive and show his sons and said, look at me when I was young. I
Yeah.
had my fresh waves, my skin was clear, I had nice weight on me. So it means a lot to so many people today, as I told them, because I look at photography as having the ability to freeze time in motion. It's alchemy. What a gift to see something that captures your eye, and and you have a few seconds to freeze that moment. What a blessing to freeze a moment in time, and then 40 years later you throw out that moment and it has so much meaning to so many people.
Yeah.
And what's happening now, as I shared earlier, a lot of the children reaching out to me saying, "Yo, I was in my mother's belly when my father died. I never met my father. So through your photographs, I got a glimpse into who my father was." And I get that a lot from a lot of young people, in particular today. So, it means a lot to a lot of people. But I didn't understand it back then while we were meeting.
Yeah.
But now it means so much. And they tell me, I even have brothers that tell me, "Yo, I never let you take my picture because I didn't really trust you at that point. But my boys did, my crew did." And they said, "I really regret the fact that, while you were taking pictures of my crew, I didn't know you. So I stepped out of the frame." And they said, "I only wish that I did it now because I didn't really know who you were."
Yeah. I mean, I understand that too. You captured a grittier New York, New York where trains were covered in graffiti inside and out, buildings were abandoned, the murder rate and crime rate overall was higher. Let's say you never took those photos over 30 years ago, and it's in started within the past 25 years. Do you think they would be regarded just as high?
Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, like let's say you never took those photos 30 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, and you just started within the past 25 years ago, because New York is different.
Right.
It's cleaner. There's more, there's bigger real estate developments, luxury apartments. Um, Not, a lot of New York natives left. So if you started more recently, do you think that the impact would be different?
I think that the impact would definitely be different because, that was a very unique time growing up in the 1970s. There's a lot going on. The war in Vietnam ended, graffiti was everywhere. It was a certain old look that's gone forever right now. And whatever reason, people are really drawn towards nostalgia. They want to see that time. They want to see the fashion in the street, especially as we get older. That's the light for a lot of people. And there weren't a lot of people that were out there documenting it. So it helped. It became the cornerstone of my success as a photographer, having documented that time period. So it means a whole lot. However, my work from the 90s is just as important, which I have very rarely shared. I documented the 90s very much like I documented the 80s in a similar way, and even capturing that transformation. And same with the 2000s. That work has not really been seen, but it's just as valuable. And my passion for sharing it is there as well. So I feel that I will still have wings, but it's something about the 80s that resonates with a lot of people, especially the way I speak about it being a time before crack, a time before both crack and
Yeah.
AIDS, because that caused a serious transformation. And again, with the war on drugs, a lot of things changed. So people really needed to see that time because we dealt with a lot of loss. We look at the epidemics of today, but when you look at the 70s and 80s with a lot of men now in their mid-20s having fought in the war in Vietnam, traumatized, the heroin epidemic was still there. Then we got hit with the crack epidemic, the AIDS epidemic, the war on drugs. There was a lot going on. So people needed to kind of like revisit that time period, to better understand it. So I think that not only were the images that I've taken very, very vital, but the way I break things down too. Because if I wasn't doing it, we might just let crack pass, not talk about what crack did and all the lives that were lost.
Yeah.
So the fact that I was there, ground zero, seeing it, it really gives greater gravity to that particular body of work.
Mm-hmm. In the first 2 minutes of the documentary about your life, Jamel Shabazz, street photographer, your barber in reference to you says Jamel had a vision. Quote, Jamel had a vision. He was ahead of a lot of people and nobody ever knew what his vision was. He was capturing life in its purest form. Do you agree with those statements? And if so, what is life in its purest form to you?
Well, at that time, life in its purest form really was a time before crack. A time when there was still hope. That's what I was looking for, the hope. Despite all the senseless deaths that were going on in the community, I was optimistic for a moment, and Tony, that young brother who shared that was a brother who I spent a lot of time with, back in the day. He was one I was trying to save heavily. And he understood that. He understood my mission. Even though he rebelled, you know, he he knew what I was trying to do. He knew my intentions. He was a young brother, smoking, drinking, wilding out there. And I was trying to rescue him and his crew. So I did have a vision early on. And my vision was to save our people. I was really determined to try to rescue as many young people as I could because so many of them were dying that I knew personally. And that was my mission. That was my vision. And I didn't really understand the magnitude that my photography would have later on in life. Because when I first started out, I wanted to have a record of my journey. I wanted to have a visual diary of my experience. I never wanted to be without memory ever again. Because I was in Germany, I had a handful of memories. And then when I would be out there in guard duty or on the perimeter, I would often reflect on and try to remember what the trains look like, what the streets look like. So I promised myself at that point I would never be without memory. But I had no idea that my mission that started in 1975 would take me to where I'm at right now, where now I have this important voice and just as an important body of work that means so much to so many people. So I guess in essence, I did have the vision that people didn't understand. I didn't quite understand it because I'm just really realizing my vision now. It took me many years to clearly understand what this thing was about. And I have to say, what enhanced that vision was a movie that Denzel Washington starred in called The Book of Eli. And it's in that movie that I start to understand that my mission was to be a recorder of our history and culture, that I needed to walk through the valleys and shadows of death and witness all these different things I was witnessing and document it. And as time would progress, now this history is recorded, and now we can go into the annals of history. So now my community, that time period, is now a historic record that is now in archives around the world. So that community that if no one had documented would not be known. So I gave visibility to a community and to a people that were often deemed invisible.
Yeah. I feel like not only were you able to capture the worst parts of poor and underserved communities, like the issue of homelessness and drug addiction and overall blight, but you were also able to capture the innocence of these communities, like the photograph of the kids flipping on a mattress, which became an album cover for the Roots, Undone. Um, but you were able to capture the innocence of these communities, and many people outside of these communities probably don't even or didn't even think that existed. So why is it important to show these nuances in our communities?
To get balance, I look back at W.E. Du Bois, and I often speak about his vision when he did the Negro exhibition in 1900, where he gathered up all these incredible photographs of Black life, honor, and dignity. And he participated in the exhibition in Paris for the Paris exposition. And these images were shown. And the idea of showing those images of pride and dignity was to counter the negative stereotypes that were constantly being projected in media. And what was so powerful about what Du Bois did at that time, it kind of like, this is before World War I. So he's doing this in France. So the French population, they're looking at these images at this exhibit, and they seeing the pride and dignity of Black people. So when World War I came and soldiers were coming over to France, they had a different interpretation of due to these photographs. And that's why a lot of Black artists started to move to France, because the stereotypes were shattered. So what I was trying to do as well is give a different glimpse of the Black community that existed that we weren't aware of. Because we hear about the division, the lack of fathers, and all the other things that are going, all the ills that exist within our community and so many other communities. I want to show the other side. And now having opportunities to exhibit my work in different countries, I'm able to show people a different side, of what they're seeing in the media as well. Because I've had an opportunity to show work in Korea, in Japan, in Belgium, France, in London, and images that represent honor. And what's interesting too, especially amongst a number of Japanese people I met, when my books and my work started being published and they were seeing it, it made a lot of them want to come to America to see that, because they believe that Black America still looked that way through my photographs.
Wow.
So many of them packed up their bags and they came to America with their cameras in the hopes of experiencing what I was documenting, not realizing that was something I did decades earlier. So the objective was to get balance to the negativity. And yes, I'm aware that the negativity exists, but I'm also aware that there is hope, there is joy that I see every day.
Yeah. They probably came here and saw a big luxury apartment and was like, "What's this?"
Indeed.
uh,
And so real interesting and true story too. Some of them even married brothers that mirrored what they saw in my photograph because they saw strength and they just saw something very, very unique within the people in my photograph. I couldn't believe it.
wow. Yeah. I mean, that's but yeah, you know, it's important. It's definitely important to show the multifacetedness and the different aspects, because people aren't just one way or one thing all the time. Um, and stereotypes, I think, stereotypes are never good, negative or positive, because they kind of marginalize people.
Right.
So, just to get into your book now, A Time Before Crack. We spoke about A Time Before Crack, literally, and we, spoke about your work and your process. But to get into the book, Professor Callie Usher, one of the contributing writers, said about you that, quote, "We trusted Jamel because he was a good person. We trusted his political philosophy. We trusted his taxonomic references, his love for us, and his worldview. He wanted us to see ourselves, the hope in our eyes, and the defiance in our b-boy stance, despite what was happening around us," end quote. So back then, did you know what you were doing, and did you know that you were humanizing people that were historically dehumanized?
Indeed. Indeed, I had a duty and responsibility, and I learned that early on, that I had a responsibility to get back. Just like those brothers that were older than me put me under the wing and guided me on a particular path. They said to me, most of the older brothers that served as my mentor said, only thing we want in return is for you to continue on that process of reaching young people and giving them a sense of guidance. So I was very clear on what I was doing. I went out with intention to see, almost like a fisherman. I likened it to being a fisherman. And I went out every day looking to see who I could just wheel in and just kind of like give guidance to. And like I said, I would take brothers to the store, we get orange juice, bananas, and just build about life, about goals and objectives, and that's what it was all about. It was about letting them know that I'm a brother and I'm concerned with you. And in order to elevate as a people, we need each other, because I felt at that time we were dealing with a war. And it was actually the war on drugs, because when Reagan became president, he put that into motion. Mm-hmm. So we dealing with that, we dealing with crack, we dealing with AIDS, we dealing with a lot that was going on. I wanted our people to survive. My father was a smoker and a drinker, and I saw the impact that it had on his life. So I was one that came home, and I was a righteous brother. So I was trying to encourage people to replace the bad habits with good habits, to put down that old gold. I get it, because I used to drink a lot of old gold and put things in my system that wasn't good for me, was destroying me. So I was trying to use my position to encourage people to really transform their lives for the better. And don't be like me. Don't make the mistakes that I made in life. You know what I mean? Because I made a number of them. So, I went there and trying to encourage people, give up that cigarette. You know what I mean? Replace that old English with some orange juice. Take different city examinations, because back in the days when certain city positions were open, I would tell young people the importance of getting a city job. And a lot of them would go get them. And it warms my heart today, because a number of brothers have reached out to me and said, yo, if it wasn't for you, I would have never gotten that city job. I'm retired now. So I was trying to encourage a lot of the young brothers to take on city positions. And when I was young and there was really no hope, I encouraged some to go in the military, to get that foundation early on, but be mindful of why you're in there. So it was all about the love. So Callie Usher got it right. He's a brother who I knew personally, you know what I mean? And that's how I was, that he nailed it.
Mm-hmm. Also in the book, In the Time Before Crack, you wrote, quote, "The photographs in this book serve as reminders of how life was in New York City before the crack epidemic. Those times were not perfect, but it was a period that gave many of us hope. And then came crack, and life would never be the same," end quote. So what were New York City residents hopeful for? What were they hopeful for prior to crack?
I think consciousness, when I came home, the spirit of the Black arts movement was still alive. There was a number of cultural events that were taking place throughout the city. We had black radio, we had black television programs that were offering inspiration. We knew that, we were in a new decade and there was going to still be a lot of challenges. And again, with Reagan being president or even being nominated for the presidency, we knew that we were faced with a lot of hard times. But we had to persevere, just like the movie Roots. This is a new generation right now, and we came up through slavery and hard times, but we have to continue to strive on despite the different obstacles that are placed in our path. We have to strive, but now through positive music, music of love and radio stations that offered inspiration. There's a sense of hope, so we were getting that way. We were like really rising to the top at that point. And then that crack came and we just went backwards. And then our neighborhoods became war zones. A lot of people lost their homes. People lost their minds. People lost their children. A number of children were placed in foster care. A lot of things happened, so crack was one of the worst things that happened. But prior to crack coming there, we were still struggling, because I think about that time period and my interactions with Vietnam veterans who had been to war just about 10 years earlier, that were navigating through that. We were getting past the heroin epidemic, even though the impact of heroin was still there. Yeah. But there was a glimmer of a little bit of hope, because there was still a time in which we had love songs. Yeah. Something we don't have anymore. Music that made you feel good. Where a brother is speaking about his love for a woman and vice versa. And it was a good time. It was a good balance. Say it again?
And begging.
Yeah, a little bit of everything, but then there was teaching too. Yeah. A lot of brothers was artists, musical artists. They were teaching. They were manifesting their love. And in that process, they taught many of us how to communicate with women. So artists like Luther Vandross and Teddy Pendergrass, the way that they spoke about love, it helped us to understand how love works, and vice versa with a lot of the sisters. So it was a hopeful time. I felt really hopeful, and then that hope started to change. Once the crack came, I started looking, the dark cloud came, and I started to become very concerned, because now the killing was on. Yeah. And now the body count was up every day. And now sisters that were once dignified, held their head up high with honor, have now fallen victim to using crack and selling their bodies. Brothers that were once on the rise, fell victim to smoking crack. So a lot of things happened. A lot of young brothers and sisters that were college bound, that had an opportunity to go to historic black colleges, now they're there, and now they're smoking crack, and now their dreams have been deferred. So I'm looking at this now, all this devastation. I'm looking at a lot of young people now dying of AIDS. I'm looking at a new fear when AIDS hit, and now Haitians are being blamed for the AIDS epidemic, and that internal hatred. So all this stuff is going on, and it's just troubling me. Like, my God, what is going on out here? Yeah. So I just had to, put my armor of God on and continue to use my voice and my platform to sound the alarm, because in essence, that's what I was striving to do, is sound the alarm, that we are faced with some very difficult times, and we have to be prepared. And I think the key is to know oneself. And once you know yourself, you have a responsibility to try to make your communities a decent place to live. So I was trying to encourage amongst a lot of young brothers, and I said I needed help. Because again, we had a lot of community activities that was going on. We had a community center called Uwasasa, where a lot of politically conscious artists from the 1960s and 70s would perform. We had our African Street Festival. We had Kwanzaa events. We had the McQuarrie Report, programs like it is on television. So there was a lot of inspirational programs that were out there trying to sound the alarm as well. But then the crack just became too overwhelming.
Yeah. So those events, like all those events that didn't happen during crack, like the crack epidemic, like did they go away?
They continue to happen, but now you start to see the casualties of war.
Yeah.
You start to see the PTSD within people who might have lost their daughter to crack, or now your son is locked up. You know what I mean? Because now you're living in war zones. So you were able to come to these different cultural events to escape the hardships of the street. But once you leave, you're going back to it. So that's a good point that you raised, because throughout the 80s, one of the main events that we had in the heart of Brooklyn in Bed-Stuy was the African Street Festival, which was this great celebration where people were able to come together in a spirit of unity. All the different tribes came together. But as time progressed, I started to see the tension existing now. Yeah. Now young people are now coming. And now they might have beef with other brothers. And that's something that we didn't see before. But now with all the violence and the hatred existing, a lot of those people will come into those events, kind of like escape it, And I started to see a little bit more of the tension. And then, like I said, people started to lose their sons
Yeah.
because that law, that crack was so great. A lot of good people that raised their children right, they lost them to the street. So you might be a conscious brother, but you lost your son to the street. So you would
Yeah.
start seeing that. So when you interact with people at those different type of festivals, like, yo, how's your son doing? Well, my son just got murdered. How's your daughter doing, man? She's not doing too well. You would hear these stories from a lot of people that were losing people within their circle. It became quite common. And even with the AIDS epidemic, it took out a lot of people. So you might even see a brother that now is suffering from AIDS. So, things just started to change visually for me. Where before everybody seemed to be healthy and strong, now you start to see a lot of struggle. Because just like today, there's a lot of death in the news each day, and people start to feel concerned about that. I didn't know it was that bad personally, but when people speak about crime today, they say it mirrors how it was in the 1980s, and it didn't dawn on me that things have gotten that bad during that time period. For whatever reason, I just didn't think about it, despite working in the jail.
Yeah. So did you ever fear for your life during those times? Like once crack came, and like, were you still as active as you were prior?
I was. The fear wasn't really there. I felt that I knew a lot of people and I would be all right. And I just didn't, because I look at some of the things I did. I can't believe I was doing it. I'll be outside 2-3 o'clock in the morning, documenting prostitutes and building with them, you know what I mean? And being around pimps and all of that. And I never really thought about none of that, because it's interesting. In a lot of cases, when people would roll up, I would know them, and some of the people that were engaged in certain activity, I didn't know. So I didn't really think about a lot of that at that point. I was always on guard, and aware of my surroundings, and know at any given point, things can change, but I don't think that I became fearful. As time went on, people became more hostile and more hateful, and they didn't want the camera around them. So I realized now I have to deal with a different strategy, because with so many individuals getting involved in the street culture, now they don't want their picture to be taken. They don't even want a camera around them. So I start to see a noticeable shift when it came down to me coming around with a camera. And then even when the word got out that I was on the job, that changed things now too, because people weren't saying he's a CO. They said, yo, he's police. So now that produced a certain frequency where in certain circles you were now not welcome, where a few years earlier you were, but now with so many people dipping into that way of life, just the notion of a person being police with a camera, it put people, on the defense. So I just started to be a shift, and my style kind of like changed now. And I got it, because a lot of people started falling victim to that lifestyle, and they no longer really want their picture taken, or they had beef with other people. So they might have been all right with me, but they didn't want their picture to be documented because they had so many enemies right now. And I wouldn't learn that until later on. That so many people were at war with each other. I just didn't know it was that bad.
How did you shift?
I shift by going to different locations now. I started to go to different cities. I started to spend time in Philly, DC, and Maryland. I started to leave the country a lot. I even looked for different terrain to go to, different communities. I spent a lot of time, much in the 90s, in Harlem, because Harlem to me was a conscious community. Brooklyn was rough. We call it Medina, the land of the warriors. But it was something about Harlem in the 90s that consciousness was still there. So I spent a lot of time on 125th Street connecting with a lot of the brothers that had a sense of awareness, and sisters. And that was the shift that I needed, and just surrounding myself with more positive, like-minded people that had the similar aims that I had. And that was very important to me. So when I look at my time in Harlem, I felt more relaxed and comfortable there. Brooklyn was always friction. At any given point, things could have happened. So between Harlem, I started going to Central Park, more serene type of atmospheres that got me away from the concrete, because I needed that. So, I look at a lot of my work from the late 90s. You see Central Park and Prospect Park, places like that. I tried to avoid the negativity as much as possible, because I didn't like that frequency.
Yeah. Was it was that change of frequency more? Was it as compelling?
Was it what now?
Is it as compelling, or was it as compelling?
It was all compelling, because it was now more spontaneous. I didn't know what I was going to experience. If I'm downtown Brooklyn, I know what I'm going to experience, because I know what's the frequency down there. It's guaranteed going to get great photographs. But now when I shifted, I was able to get a different body of work, Like when you look at the man swinging the dog, I'm creating more images like that now. I'm going to more parades. I'm spending time in locations that are very different to me. I'm spending time in the East and West Village. It's a different vibration, and it's a new set of challenges because now I don't really know people, but I accepted those challenges. I'm building up a new body of work.
Yeah.
And I like that opportunity to embrace something that's different. And I'm going against the grain because in the beginning, I pretty much documented the Black and brown communities. And then as time progressed, I started to document other communities. I would even spend time in Spanish Harlem and document that particular region. So I expanded my horizons and I was able to build a more broader body of work.
Mm-hmm. What was the process of getting writers to contribute to this book?
It was a very interesting process. I wanted people who could tell stories, and unfortunately, a number of writers weren't included in that book. So the book was rushed. So there's a lot of flaws with it. It could have been better. Because I had certain key writers that had very important stories to be told.
Yeah.
But I think that with COVID and working from home, unlike my previous books where I physically went to an office and went over everything, this time around it wasn't like that. So a few writers weren't included, but I wanted people that were on deck to tell stories. Like Kenneth Montgomery, who's an attorney. He was both a prosecutor and a defense attorney, and he's a very conscious brother. I felt that his voice is very important because of the things that he sees from that judicial system, and so that was very key to me. He's a good brother. He's very conscious of the struggles. I wanted his voice to be included. With this young woman who writes about Yvette, she's given an account about an individual that fell victim to crack, and I thought that was very important because we need to know who are these young women that fell victim to crack. And I felt that was I wanted to get that story out there, to hear about the struggle of a woman who fell victim to crack. I had a drug dealer, a brother that sold drugs in my neighborhood, who I was actually in opposition with, for a while. Beautiful brother when I knew him when he was younger, but he decided that he was going to sell drugs. And I convinced him to write an essay in my book about redemption. And unfortunately, it didn't make the book. I think somehow it just didn't make it. That was a very important essay to include because I wanted a drug dealer. So here you have a young woman who fell victim to crack. You have a drug dealer who sold it. And then I had another young woman, and whatever reason, her piece didn't make the book. And that was very vital to me because she spoke about one of the first casualties of war in my community to crack was the male woman. And the male woman fell victim to crack, and she started using it, started going through the mail looking for checks. So I wanted people that had very compelling stories to speak about the crack epidemic, both before and after, from personal experiences and observations. So it's all right. I'm still fine-tuning what I do, because despite the fact that producing a few books, it's still a learning process for me. And in retrospect, the book would have been done very differently, but I rushed it because I felt that in a sense, it is the visual medicines that needed to re-spark these conversations.
Yeah.
So despite what I feel, every photograph in that picture has a relationship to crack in some form of fashion, in addition to the writers. My girl, Tiffany Bates, who I know very personally, growing up in my projects in Red Hook, I wanted her to write from her observation, seeing things from its inception to where we at right now. So I just asked her, Master Killer, his queen reached out to me and said he wants to contribute to your book. So I thought that was a beautiful thing that he would want to add on to the site. Because one of the things I did in the beginning on social media, I did put it out there, I'm looking for writers. And then a few people came to me, but I wanted individuals that really were connected to Brooklyn or New York to more write because it would mirror what I'm feeling. Yeah. So some people I turned back. So that was important to me.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Shabazz, you're known mostly for photography. You've documented so much of Black America that has been and will continue to be depicted in articles, music, films, and television. So my final question to you is, why do words matter to you?
Words matter because they can build or they could destroy. And I learned that early on in life, as I approached a lot of people on the street, to tell a person they're beautiful, that they have greatness. We need to hear that because we have been so beaten down to the point where we don't feel that we're anything. We have belittled each other with words. Back in the old days, when I was coming of age, we used to take the word words and put S in front of it. Swords. Your words is your swords, your weapon. and it's how you use them to build or destroy. So for me, I always wanted to be a builder. I wanted to use words to encourage people because I understood that they mattered, you know? So I wanted to tell young sisters that they were queens, that they were beautiful, that you were special, that I love your hair, you know, because again, we have been conditioned to hate ourselves, you know, so I knew that I had a tongue. And if I could use this tongue properly, I can empower people and encourage them to help them understand. You know, so throughout my entire life, I try to use those encouraging words. Even to this very day on social media, every opportunity I get when I see people sharing something that's profound, I want them to know that I see you. You know, I try to give them encouragement. A simple word of encouragement, continue on, you're doing a great job. It makes all the difference in the world. So to me, words, positive words are like seeds. And you plant a seed in the mind of a person, you continue to nourish that seed through a reinforcement, you can make a difference. And then the flip side of it, that's why I said build and destroy. Because the other aspect of words is that they could be demeaning and hurtful, humiliating. Now, I'm going to be very honest with you, and I got to say it for what it is. I absolutely despise that word nigga. And when that word started to be used in the manner in which it was throughout the 1980s and embraced and celebrated, it produced a certain type of mentality. And that bothered me. And I was working with great diligence throughout much of my life to convince young brothers that they weren't niggas. You're not niggas. You're gods. You're king. You're great. But you're not niggas. You know what I mean? So that meant a lot to me because that was one word, one harmful word. And yes, it was turned around to be this term of endearment, which I will never accept. I understand it. I get it. But I understand the psychological impact that it has for people that embrace it, that celebrate. Even when I came of age back in the old days, women were referred to as queens. Peace queen, peace sister. You see, now many women despise that term because it's too soft, and they prefer to be called bad bitches. And that troubles me that we came from being royal, you know, being righteous to now embrace terms that are very demeaning psychologically. So words do matter. And I'm fighting with great diligence to try to change the narrative right now. And I've been met with so much opposition, trying to encourage young boys they're not niggas. Do you know that's been one of my biggest fights today? To go to a group of young boys and say to them, brothers, I just want y'all to know that y'all not niggas. And they look at me and say, what's this nigga talking about? We ain't niggas. You know what I mean? That breaks my heart coming from where I come from. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, I see the value of words, and I listen very carefully to words. You know, even when we started calling ourselves dogs, you know, you get pissed off at brothers because they refer to themselves as gods, but yet you embrace being niggas, dogs, bitches, hoes, anything. You know what I mean? And that really just bothers me, brother. So, you know, that's a very great question that you presented. And you can tell from my response that I'm very passionate about how words are used. You know what I mean? Because I have to use words all the time in my engagement with people. And one of the great words that I use in the 99.9% of my interactions with brothers is brother. How you doing, brother? See, when you say brother and you embrace that brother, that's your air, like that's your man right there. It has meaning to it. You know what I mean? But all these other terms are very derogatory. We got to go back to being brothers and sisters, because if you look at another black man as your brother, you'll be less likely to want to kill him, and that's your brother. And I noticed that when we stopped calling each other's brothers, the killing escalated. You know what I mean? And people didn't want to hear that no more. You know what I mean? That's how bad the term brother now is looked upon in a very negative light. You know what I mean? You used to call somebody brother, you ain't my brother. But back in the 60s and 70s, that was a high compliment to say brother, my air light, my man, my homie. You see a sister now, how you doing, sister? I ain't your sister. I want to be a bad bitch. And that's being celebrated right now. So a lot of negativity is being celebrated today. You know what I mean? And when we look at our conditions as a people, I personally feel that we have regressed because of much of the language that we are using upon each other. You mean somebody sit back and say we've elevated, but from someone from my generation, you know, who's been around for a long time and seen progress, and now sitting back and making an assessment of what's going on, I'm very troubled with what I'm seeing, brother. You know what I mean? Because we've lost a lot. We've lost love. Even the term itself, love, is now viewed in a sense to be weak. I've met people who have told me they've never been loved before. You know how many young people told me that they've never been told they loved before? So when you look at a powerful word like love, and they have never in your life been in love or been told you've been loved is a deep thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I know older brothers that can't respond to love. See, when we were coming up back in the 80s, you know what I mean? And even in the 90s, we saw a brother say, man, I love you, brother. You know what I mean? And there was nothing funny about that. You loved the brother from your heart. And you were able to say that. And there was no negativity attached to it. You know what I mean? This is your brother, and you want to know that you love you. I find now that word is being diluted, and it's not being as used as frequent as it once was, because people think that you have some type of interior motive in using it. And that pains me. You know what I mean? That we've gotten away from a simple word like love.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand what you're saying. And I definitely feel the passion and the vigor in in your sentiment for sure. Especially coming from the time period that you came in and the message that you've always tried to get across with your art. I lied. That's actually not my last question. My last question is,
It's all good, brother. It's all good.
What's next for you?
Good question. I hope you're gonna ask that, brother. I've done as much as I can photographically. I do have a new book coming out, which is based off my photo albums that I've carried around for the past 30 years. So that book could be dropping in December. But what's very important to me is to do movies. You know what I mean? I've had certain experience in my life that I think is really important to be on the big screen. And I've done a lot of writing over the past few years. And one of the things that I've done in studying the various miniseries that are on cable television, I look at the power of them. So I've actually wrote a really great story called The Time Before Crack to take people into the lives of individuals I photographed in a series to help you better understand how things work. We can look at things photographically and see the beauty of the images, but imagine now I take these photographs like Carol and bring him to life in a time before crack, in a period in which there was still a spirit of brotherly love. So my main objective for 2023 is to engage one of these major cable networks and convince them that this book, A Time Before Crack, has the wings to be a great miniseries, to serve as a counterbalance to a lot of the negativity that we are seeing. Because it's like enough of the movies that we're drug dealing, we're killing each other, we're using foul language towards one another. All right, we've seen that, we get that. There has to be a counterbalance, and for the most part, I have not really seen a series or a movie that deals with my generation, mainly the late 1970s. So I want to bring A Time Before Crack to the big screen, and it's my hope that it will have similar impact to what Roots had on my generation, and it will create a consciousness and create a situation where we go back to calling each other brother and sister and showing how life was during that small window where things were still good. Yeah, there's going to be conflict and situations of that nature, but I want to show conflict resolution in this movie. And then I've written a really deep story about my experience in the military, which I feel really good about sharing. And it's going to give insight into what it was like to be overseas, after the Vietnam War. What was that experience like to be 17, 18 years old, interacting with people from different states, being in the same space as people who were in the Klan, being with brothers from the South, being with brothers from California. What was that situation like? What music did we listen to? What was some of the things that we were dealing with? Because one of the experiences I had during my time in the Army, and I speak about it quite often, is that we had a drug problem, out throughout Germany. There was hash, there was heroin, there was mandrakes, there was Thai stick, there was a massive drug problem, and a lot of young men overdosed off of drugs, and others were incarcerated behind their dealings with drugs. So I've written extensively about that experience. So for me, it's all about the big screen right now. It's a new territory for me, but I have a determined idea. And like Gordon Parks did, he transitioned from photography to going to do films. I want to mirror what he did, and I feel that we need these films for this day and time in light of everything that's going on in this country. I feel that as an elder, I have a responsibility to use my platform to produce content that's going to bring about a spirit of love and unity that we once had, because it's really not being done right now. A lot of movies are being done over again, and they talk about redoing Scarface and a lot of other movies. It's like, it's all good, but when we look at all of the death and destruction in our community, we need to see something else. Because again, these images, these movies, these photographs are being shown around the world. So not for me now, I want to continue what Spike Lee did in his process, and I want to take it back to Brooklyn, and I want to produce a number of films. All I need is an opportunity, I'm hoping to collaborate with Spike, soon about that to get his insight because I have to do it. I feel that's what I want my legacy to be, and I want to say this here too. The film that you mentioned, the documentary about me, is not a reflection of me whatsoever. It's
Okay.
one of the most painful things I've done in my life because I wasn't prepared for it. So I'm working great diligence today to really show who I really am and what I represent. I'm not
Okay.
one that enjoys the camera. That's not something I feel really good about. That's not what I want my legacy to be. I
Yeah.
want my legacy to be of a brother who was true and living, who had a profound love for his community and used his platform, his voice to make a difference, not only in his city, but throughout the world. That's my legacy. So
Okay.
I'm working towards that right now.
Okay. Yeah, man. Sounds great. I'm looking forward to everything that everything that will come next from you. Um, thank you once again, Mr. Jamel Shabazz, for, you know, for allowing me to, reach out, accepting my emails and, answering my emails and being in communication with you since the summer. It's been a long time coming, a few months, but thank you for, still allowing me to interview you months later, um, after your book came out, and there were some things that you were like not happy about as far as the quality wise, but I enjoyed the book, and I know that this is not like the end of what you put out, so I'm looking forward to everything else. And yeah, man, words matter. Thank you once again.
Well, thank you, brother. And I'll make sure you get a copy of my new book when it comes out in about 3 weeks. I'm really happy with that one, so I can't wait to share that book with you so you can see the distinct difference between both of them. But at the end of the day, they both serve as medicine. But I salute you once again for all the important work that you're doing, brother. I enjoyed my time with you. I will continue to support your efforts. And if you ever need any support from me, I'm here to support you in any way I can.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, brother. You take care of yourself. Thank you for the time.